Hey guys, welcome to another video. This time around I'm going to be making a Clone Wars clone helmet using Pepakura. I'm going to be going over all of the steps that I used to make this helmet, so don't worry if you don't know how to use Pepakura. I would like to point out real quick that this is not an easy build. It's pretty difficult compared to just EVA foam cosplay. I don't want you to get discouraged, but I just want you to know the truth about this project. And the truth is, it's hard. It's basically manually 3D printing something, so there's a lot of steps and materials that you have to use in order to make it look like mine. This first part is just going to be going over the paper model, just getting that basic Clone Trooper helmet shape, and I will say that the paper is not very easy to work with. It's a very straightforward process, but in reality it just is more difficult than you would anticipate, but I'll get into all of that later, so don't worry. Right now we just need to focus on what we need first and foremost. So the first thing that you're going to need to do is download the free program called Pepakura. A lot of people have asked me about this, so I'm just going to go through the process right now. I did not make Pepakura or anything like that, so I don't really know how the whole thing works. All I know is how to print out the templates for a project like this one. So if you have a question about how the software itself works, I probably don't know myself. There's a small difference between the Pepakura viewer and designer, but they both can print, so it doesn't really matter which one you use. The next thing you're going to need to do is download the template. So go to one of my videos, this is the bonus parts, and all you need to do is go to the description, click on the RPF link, and then scroll down past the pictures of me, and this is where you will see all of the templates that I have posted. So you'll notice that there are two helmet files here. One of them is the Pepakura version and the other is a PDF version that I just printed out for your convenience. So if you use the PDF version, you won't actually need Pepakura itself. So right now we're looking at the PDF version. It's just a PDF file. Everybody's probably seen them by now. In order to print this PDF file, you just go up to the little print icon, click on it, and then choose whatever settings you like. I chose to print in black and white. I don't think it'll make a big difference since it's all black and white anyway. And here we have the most important setting, which is the double-sided print. You want to make sure that you don't print on both sides of the paper because obviously you're going to cut them out and you don't want one pattern on the other side, basically. I would also like to point out that my paper size is letter. If you're in a different country, then your paper will probably be different. You can also change the scale when you go to print, as you see the little scale option. If you want a bigger or smaller helmet, you can do it that way. Real quick, I also wanted to show you what the Pepakura version of the helmet looks like. As you see, I went back to the RPF page and opened up the Pepakura version. Here we have the 3D model along with the pages that it will print on. Even if you use the PDF version of the helmet, I would still recommend you download Pepakura and pull up this helmet file so you can just see where each of the pieces goes on the model, and you can kind of get a good idea of what the finished product will look like. The last thing that you're going to need for the helmet is the Greeblies page of my templates that I made a while ago. This contains some of the detail pieces like the fin on the top of the helmet and the chin piece as well, and some other pieces too. This is just some stuff that was not included in the Pepakura version. So before you go and print, for those of you who don't know, Pepakura needs to be printed onto cardstock paper. That's not regular printer paper. It's a little thicker than regular paper, as I will show in a little bit, but basically we just need extra strength in the 3D model when we put it all together, and plain printer paper just isn't strong enough to hold up a 3D model on its own. However, you can print the Greeblies page on just regular paper because it doesn't need to hold anything together. Those are just going to be foam pieces that we add on top of the model afterward. Real quick, I just wanted to point out that the printing on the back of the paper that you'll see is not going to be there on your model. That's just because I printed some stuff beforehand and I decided not to use it, so I'm recycling the paper by using the side that I didn't print on. So now we need to talk about tools for a little bit, and basically all you're going to need are the things you see here, just scissors, glue, a knife, and some tape. You'll see throughout the build that I use a different type of tape. That doesn't really matter a whole lot as long as it's on the inside and not on the outside of the build. And I also use a bit of super glue, but we'll get into that later. So now I'm going to show you what it looks like to actually make a Pepakura helmet, and I'm going to speed up the process a little bit because otherwise we'd be here forever. Basically all you have to do is cut out all the shapes that you see on the paper. Wherever you see a solid straight line, that's where you cut all the way through the paper. And you just keep cutting out the pieces one at a time, and eventually you'll have all of them together. There's quite a few pages, so this will take some time, but just be patient and try to cut as accurately as possible, staying right on top of that line. Only cut out the lines that are straight lines. The dashed and dotted lines, we'll get into that later, but basically don't cut all the way through those. Those little triangle pieces that you can see kind of sticking out from each of the sides, those are what we're going to glue underneath of each of the pieces, but we'll get into that later. Basically all you need to know is that you just cut out the entire shape and don't cut off any of the extra pieces hanging off. Only cut out the straight lines. Now moving on, we have the dashed lines here that you can see all over the pieces, and where there's a dashed line, that means you score it, which means that you don't cut all the way through the piece, you just lightly brush your knife across the top of it and cut halfway through it. This would not work with normal paper, which is why we need to use cardstock. Once you score all of those dashed lines, you can fold them and you'll see kind of how this all comes together. Just keep scoring them and folding them and gluing them together, and then you'll eventually get the finished product. Now there are also these dot dashed lines that have a dash and then a dot in the middle. These are different from the dashed lines. For these, you actually fold them upwards, whereas the dashed lines you fold downwards. It's a pretty significant difference, so make sure you understand kind of which way they're supposed to fold. Okay, so some of the lines on the printer didn't quite print all the way, it just got cut off at the very end, but this isn't a big deal. All you have to do is use your ruler and sort of put it there on top of the line, and you can finish the line. Even though you don't have the printed line, you still know kind of where it's going. Okay, so when you're matching the pieces together, you're going to need to match them by numbers. It's really simple, really easy. All you have to do is put together the two matching numbers and then glue them using that triangle flap piece that I showed earlier. So as you can see, here we have number 465, and there's a flap on one side and just a blank flat edge on the other. And we're just going to put that flap underneath of the other piece and then glue it together. I'm using the stick glue. It's okay to use it here because it's just paper and it'll hold it together a lot better than, say, foam. But if you need some extra strength on the connector piece, you can just tape the bottom of it. Just make sure that the tape that you use is on the inside of the piece, not on the outside where the numbers are. After putting the glue on the flap, you just kind of push the two pieces together, try to line up the lines as much as possible, and then just hold it there for a little while until the glue dries. So for the rest of the build, just keep lining up the edges and gluing the flaps onto the opposite side, matching up the numbers as you go, and eventually you'll get something like this. This is the dome section, as you can see. Okay, so when you get to the eyepieces, like you can see here, basically you just want to round off the edges a little bit because the Pepakura software only deals with straight lines, and these pieces are supposed to be rounded a little bit, so make sure you kind of draw that in and then cut it out when it's rounded. Also, you may just want to leave out that little edge piece on the inside of the eyes. I left it out because it's not really necessary, and in that case, you don't really need the flaps that go along that edge. As you can see, I cut them off, but you'll see what it looks like later. Here's another piece that we're going to cut out. There are some smaller pieces on this helmet, admittedly, and they are pretty difficult to cut out sometimes. But just kind of stick with it and do your best and try to stay right on top of that line. The more accurate you cut, the better the finished product will be. So with this piece, once again, we're just going to keep scoring it, making sure not to cut all the way through, but keep scoring it and then folding it in whichever direction it needs to go. The dashed line goes down and the dot dash line goes up. For this piece, once again, it was cut off at the bottom, but that's okay. You can just kind of finish it off. Just guess where it's gonna go. It's really not a big deal, but if you want to know kind of what it's supposed to look like, you can look back at the Pepakura model and get a good idea. So here is one of the chin pieces, just kind of cut out and fold it together. And after this, we'll look at some of the face sections, like the frown piece that we have here. I'm just going to transfer those lines over to the Pepakura model. Just kind of draw them on with a pencil and kind of mark off the sections where you're going to cut out. And I'll just kind of show you real quick on the actual helmet that I made, what it's supposed to look like in the end. So make sure you mark off the correct teeth pieces that are going to be gray versus the ones that are going to be black. And the black section is going to go underneath of the gray, so it'll sort of create a layered effect. But anyway, after you attach the frown to the chin piece, you're going to kind of score it along this line that I show here. This is actually not in the Pepakura file, but it's one that is necessary in order to get that Clone Wars style look, and you'll want to do that to both sides and then fold it down. After that, we can go back to the eyepieces, and we're going to attach them just at that middle section. You gotta be kind of careful with this one, make sure it doesn't fall apart or anything. And then we're going to attach these cheek pieces that I made off camera. It's very simple, just matching numbers again. And once you have all of that together, you can attach the chin piece and the frown piece as well, and that'll give you kind of the completed front look of the helmet. I will mention that I used some super glue on this section of the helmet just to make it more secure. So here we're just looking at another section of the helmet. This is that sort of indented ring around the back of the dome. I will say attaching this piece to the dome was probably the most troublesome piece on the entire build, so just don't get frustrated with this piece. The spackling that we put on later in the build will probably cover up most of the mistakes that we make. Here we also see some of the back sections of the helmet. It's coming together pretty simply. There's not a whole lot going on. It's all just bigger shapes, which are probably easier to work with, I would say. Here we have some of the ear sections on the helmet, and these are also a little tricky since there's so many smaller pieces or thinner pieces of paper kind of glued together. It can be kind of tricky, but it's worth it in the end. And then when we have those all set, we're just going to glue it onto the side of the helmet, probably doing the back section first, as that's easier. We'll probably glue the face section on last. So for this piece, this is the section that goes above the ears. There's one little line that I wanted to show that is not actually on the template for some reason, but you want to score this section as well, as it will come into play later. So here we're just kind of looking at all the pieces we have so far. We've got the dome and some other pieces here. So now I'm going to attach the dome to the back of the helmet. These are both bigger pieces, so it's going to take some effort to kind of get them where I want them, but I would recommend doing the back of the helmet and the dome before you add on the front faceplate. And here we have them both together. This black tape that I'm using is Gorilla Tape. It's a lot stronger than just regular tape, which is why I'm using it here, because this is such a bigger connection piece that it needs more strength to hold it together. For this chin section, we're going to have to change it up a little bit since it's not very accurate on the Pepakura model. Basically, after you attach this V section to the upper part of the chin, you're going to need to put a piece in between there that fits further back, and you'll probably have to draw one like I did here, just kind of add it to the one that I already made, and just keep trimming it down until it finally fits in position. Now on the back of the helmet, there's this little circle piece that we need to attach, but I'm actually going to attach this piece after we harden the helmet, since it's going to be difficult to get in there and harden this piece separately. It's somewhat hard to explain, but if you look at the one that I already made, you'll kind of see what I mean. Moving on to the next piece that we need to adjust, and this is the vent caps on the front of the helmet. From the Greeblies page, we take this little circle and just draw it onto the middle of these pieces here. Then just cut that circle out as best you can, and then glue it where it's supposed to go. After that is done, and we have the vent section of the helmet glued in place, we're basically done with the helmet, but there's a few little sections that we needed to add just in the front. Once again, we're going to take that template and kind of draw it onto some foam. So for the vent caps on the front, we're actually going to kind of add a base for them to sit on that's sort of indented into the helmet, just like on the chin piece. The ones that I'm making here, I'm going to save for later. I'm going to use those as the actual vent caps, but we also need to make that base that I mentioned before, so I'm going to make that next. So for that base, I'm going to actually use the Mod Podge lid as sort of a template. I'm only using this because it's a bigger circle. You can probably find one around your house, but basically I'm just going to draw that and then cut it out, and I'm going to use that to stick it in the helmet. So now I'm going to glue it into the helmet, and I'm just going to use hot glue for this. I'm just going to add like a ring of hot glue around the edges, being very careful when I put it into the helmet. And as you can see, it will kind of sit back a little bit as a platform should. It's not going to be smooth up against it because we still have to put the actual vent cap in later. But once that is done, we are finished with the Pepakura model helmet. The next step will be to harden it with plastic and then put spackling on the outside to smooth out all those rough edges. This is probably the most tedious part of the entire build. It's just very difficult sometimes to get those edges to line up like they should, but it looks really good in the end. So thank you to my Patreons once again, and I'll see you guys in the next part.